Boa noite a todos.
Good evening, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here participating in such an important event. I would like to thank the coordinators, and I would like to inform you that questions for me should be sent to the booth, Sanofi's booth, and I will be very happy to answer you by email. This is due to time constraints that we have today. And here on our first slide, I'm going to share my screen. I'll share my screen with you. One moment, please. On this first slide, you see my brief resume, and I would like to highlight that being a member of the technical chamber, advisor for immunization of poliomyelitis at the Ministry of Health, is a great honor for me. So let's start with some considerations about the risk of the resurgence of poliomyelitis in Brazil. These are my potential conflicts of interest, and I would like to briefly recap the history. 30 years ago, polio paralyzed approximately 1,000 children per day in 125 countries around the world. Dr. Luiza, your slides, your screen is not appearing. It is not. Okay. Let's see what we can do here. Would you like me to share the screen for you? One moment. This is interesting.
Muito bem. Então,
very well. So just going back, these are some of the items on my resume. Can you see my screen now?
Sim, agora a gente vê, tá tudo certo.
Yes, now we can see. Okay, so let's start with some remarks about the risk of resurgence of polio in Brazil. This is some key data of the last years. I'd like to say that 30 years ago, polio paralyzed almost 1,000 children per day in 125 countries around the world, including in the Americas. In 1985, the countries in the Americas set forth a target to eradicate polio in our region. In 91, we had the notification of the last case of polio in the Americas, in Peru, and in 94, after a process of documentation and verification, the Americas region was certified as being free of the circulation of wild-type polio. Here on the right side, we have the year and each of the countries listed here reporting their last registered case of polio. On this slide, you can see some key pieces of data about the strategy to eradicate polio. In 1988, we had the launch of a global program by the World Health Organization to encourage and incentive countries to eradicate polio. In the year 2000, unfortunately, in the Americas, we received reports of a first outbreak of vaccine-derived poliovirus that was causing poliomyelitis in many children. In reality, that outbreak was preceded by another one in Egypt in the end of the 1990s, but it was not duly investigated at that time. This was only known after this first outbreak in the Dominican Republic. In 2012, we had the publication of what we call the polio endgame by the World Health Organization, with the strategies to eradicate polio. In 2014, the recommendation for the use of an inactivated polio vaccine universally. In 2016, replacing around the world the oral vaccine, attenuated triple vaccine, with an attenuated oral dual vaccine. And we got to the present date, in 2019, the publication of another chapter by the WHO on the strategies to eradicate polio. As you know, the poliovirus is an enterovirus of the Picornaviridae family. There's 3 serum types. The last case of wild type 2 virus was detected in 1999 and declared eradicated in the world in September 2015. The last case of the wild type 3 was detected in 2012, declared eradicated in October 2019. We had the eradication of the wild serum types of polio types 2 and 3 eradication, but we did not eliminate the disease. Why? Because we continue seeing the virus that derived from the oral attenuated virus that continues to circulate and cause paralysis. You can see on the slides that starting in 2014, many countries around the world introduced at least one first doses of the IPV vaccine, the inactivated poliovirus vaccine, and this number was increased significantly at each year. And in December 2020, we had 194 countries already with the IPV introduced in their national immunization program. And of those, only 4 countries had introduced IPV at subnational levels. But what's important to say is that of 194 countries, only 50 countries out of 194 continue using exclusively IPV, and 141 use IPV followed by OPV, either as a primary regimen or in vaccination campaigns. Here you can see the lists in yellow. Pakistan and Afghanistan continue to be countries considered as endemic. Nigeria is no longer considered endemic. And now in 2021, we had the notification of only 2 cases of wild-type polio, of paralysis caused by type 1 wild polio. And this number is very positive because at the same time, from January 1st to April 13th, we had the notifications of 40 cases of wild polio, but we continue to receive this notification of cases identified in other sources, for example, in the environment. Of the 6 regions in the WHO, 5 have already been certified in terms of the polio eradication. Only the Eastern Mediterranean region is still to receive certification. We have a brief delay between slides, and that may be a little bit confusing, but in any way, let's try and make it in 30 minutes. In this chart, you can see the number of cases of CVDPV, circulating VDPV, detected per serotype until 2019. And this is an expressive slide showing that after the switch and the removal of the oral vaccine for type 2, there was an increase in CVDPV1 in 2017, and CVDPV2, and then in 2018, the 3 types, and in 2019, detection of serotype 1, CVDPV1, and CVDPV2. This slide also brings data that is concerning. It's bad news, but also good news because the number has decreased significantly in 2021. These are the cases of PV2, sorry, more than 1,000 cases in the world of PV2, compared to only 62 cases in 2021. So this number of 2,000 cases was in the 1,049 cases was in 2020, 62 in 2021. Now, for CVD-PV1, we had 32 cases in 2020 and only one case so far detected in 2021. And this data corresponds to the period from January 1st to April 13th of this year. CVD-PV2 continues to exist, and it's still isolated from other human sources and other sources such as the environment, both in 2020 and 2021, as you can see here. In the Americas, we have the report from Venezuela in June 2018 of one case of acute flaccid paralysis where they detected Sabin type 3. This is an isolated data from Venezuela. There's no notification of other more recent cases of polio caused by the vaccine-derived virus. However, as you can see, in 2018 in the region, the vaccine coverage with 3 doses of polio vaccine was of only 16%. And at that time, the IPV regimens should, in theory, have been introduced in Venezuela. This slide shows IVDPV cases of immunodeficiency-associated vaccine-derived poliovirus per year, starting in, and these cases have been monitored for many years. This is a study published recently by the CDC, and you can see in 2019 there was still a notification of the virus, serotype VDPV 1, 2, and 3, and immunocompromised patients. But there are cases
Esse delay aqui está incomodando bastante.
This delay is a nuisance. It's not going through the slides. Aileen, can you help me show the previous one? Dr. Luiza, I think you're on the PowerPoint screen. If you go to the Zoom screen, you're going to see the screen that I'm sharing. I'm sharing for you. Can you see it? So that's the screen you're sharing?
A tela que você está compartilhando é essa e eu estou voltando.
And I'm going back to the previous slide, please.
Aqui os senhores podem notar.
So here you can see this is well-known data of an individual, an immunodeficient individual that remains with replication of the poliovirus for 28 years. This was reported and published in 2015. Next slide, please. So these cases showed here of IVDPV correspond to the following. One case was at the time of the switch, and the other 2 cases of IVDPV 3 and 1, 3 in Argentina in 2018, and VDPV 1 in Colombia also in 18, but the Colombian case, unfortunately, was not included in that publication I showed you on the previous slide. Next slide, please. Going back to the vaccine coverage with IPV here in Brazil. Brazil recommends 3 doses of IPV in the primary regimen through the National Immunization Program. And I would like to highlight that since 2016, we've been showing a very low coverage. For a target of 95%, we're achieving coverage below 90%. And now in 2020, due to circumstances we wouldn't need to discuss, as you can all imagine, the vaccine coverage with the 3 first doses against polio was of only 75%. Next slide, please. Coverage varies according to the state. As you can see, Amapá has a reported coverage of only 40%, and this is extremely concerning. It's, I would say, unacceptable, but no Brazilian state has achieved at least a 90%. They're not achieving that, and that's also reason for great concern, considering our target of 95%. Homogeneity of coverage is also very low, and I would say that this is not acceptable. The coverage is heterogeneous between cities and territories, not only in Brazil, but in the entire Latin America. We have neighbors, right? So that's really troubling. But our homogeneity is very low. And the last reports by the ministry show homogeneity of 20% in 2020. For a figure to be considered acceptable, it would have been 70%.
Essa lâmina mostra outro dado,
This is also very sad when we look at the situation of Brazil there. The acute flaccid paralysis in Americas, in the different countries here. This is between 2019 and 2020. This rate should be 1 case per 100,000 individuals under 15 years of age. Only 4 countries in Latin America have achieved that. And Brazil is way back there. Brazil could be a country in green, but we are one of the ones in red. Very poor epidemiological surveillance, under notification, under report. So this is very worrisome.
Nessa outra lâmina, os senhores podem ver que nas primeiras 14 semanas de 2020,
in the initial 14 weeks of 2021, there's a very low number when compared to the initial 14 weeks of 2020, when the figure was already too low, and when we compared to the figures in 2019 and 2018. So the situation is getting worse. This is also very worrisome. The pending results of viral isolation. In that same period, in 2020, there were 27 cases that were pending results, was 6.something%, and in 2021, it's more than 40% of viral isolation tests that we are still waiting for the results. And surveillance is very poor. The number of cases of acute flaccid paralysis with good sampling per country, it says here 52 weeks, but it's in 2018, 2019. That figure should be at least 80% of acute flaccid paralysis should have had adequate feces collection. The average of the region is 78%, so it's below the recommendation. And Brazil also a very low figure, 61%. So it is clear that we need to improve on that. So the vaccine coverage, polio vaccine coverage in Latin America is not sufficiently high and sufficiently homogeneous to prevent the circulation of wild-type poliovirus or to prevent the CVDPV emergence. This is data from a report of the 12th meeting of the regional committee, so this is Latin America as a whole, for the polio eradication certification. So the final phase of polio eradication in the Americas. You see that there are many countries in blue. However, the Commission was especially concerned with the sustainability with the polio eradication status in some countries there, namely Bolivia, Brazil, Ecuador, Guatemala, Haiti, Paraguay, and Venezuela. And these countries, this group of countries, which unfortunately Brazil is a member of, accounts for, so these countries account for 32% of the individuals younger than 1 in Americas.
Apenas ratificando alguns dados de vigilância.
Just to emphasize some epidemiological surveillance data that I showed you before, there's been a decrease in the report of acute flaccid paralysis from 2019 to 2020 when compared 45 initial weeks. So there was a drop from 25 to 100% in the report of those cases. Brazil is there in orange. So in Brazil, there was a 25 to 50% decrease in reports of acute flaccid paralysis, ACP. So the report says that polio surveillance is not sufficiently sensitive to detect imported wild-type poliovirus or a VDPV in a timely manner in case that happens. We see that Brazil was assessed in this study, and it's in dark green, so it means that we need to greatly improve our surveillance. ACP surveillance is the primary way for you to detect poliovirus. It is essential for you to have high-quality surveillance for you to eradicate polio. Environmental surveillance is an important supplementary activity, and every country should have nation-level environmental surveillance and make sure that there's no circulating poliovirus detection gaps. And what are the important activities for you to increase sensitivity of surveillance? First, effective case detection. Second, case investigation, case report, monitoring, and supervision of all of the cases. In green in the map, you see Brazil, meaning that there is nationwide environmental surveillance, but actually we know that it is only the state of São Paulo that carries out systematic environmental surveillance in Brazil. This is also a matter of concern, the contention of poliovirus. According to this report, the countries in dark orange, Brazil is one of them, are those countries where the country that has not minimized the risks of reintroduction of poliovirus that are associated to places that obtain, handle, or store infectious materials or potentially infectious poliovirus materials. This is the risk analysis that you'll find in this report. It takes into account vaccine coverage, surveillance, healthcare determinants, and other healthcare drivers, contention situation, and preparedness and response for outbreaks. And we can see that Brazil As a pink country means a high risk for the control of a outbreak. So there's a high risk for the reintroduction of the polio virus.
Próximo, por favor. Embora a vacina oral contra polio tenha sido
The oral polio vaccine has been very useful in eradicating polio. We all know that. We don't deny that. However, it is the main cause of polio in the Americas today. So we need a vaccine that poses no risk of reversion. Before that, and then endgame strategy in the region will need a change for the use only of IPV with at least 3 doses and large coverage. Silent circulation in Americas today can happen for virus derived from the oral vaccine and not from wild-type virus. You are familiar with the situation in these photos. This is Brazil in the photos. VDPVs affect non-immunized or sub-immunized populations that live in areas with inadequate basic sanitation. And if you have low vaccine coverage and with poor sanitation, the mutant VDPV virus derived from attenuated oral vaccine and excreted into the environment will be transmitted to susceptible populations, leading to the onset of other viruses, such as IVDPV and AVDPV. There are some different types of polio vaccines. There's IPV, standard one of intramuscular administration, but also a subcutaneous IPV. It's an alternative according to the WHO in case there's a scarcity of IM-IPV. It seems today that this is no longer a problem because there is enough supply of the IPV vaccine. There's also the oral bivalent vaccine with 1 and 3 serotype. Its supply is also up to debate. There's the monovalent 2 oral vaccine. It started to be used to control outbreaks in some countries, in Africa, for instance, where there are outbreaks of CVDPV2. This is also, its supply is up for debate. It's not something that you just take out of the shelf at any time. You need to plan out for its supply. And there is a study for a new OPV2 that is more stable, also for outbreak control. It does not reply the standard IM-IPV, and it's not totally free of reversion risks. So the prevalence of the traditional monovalent OPV2 vaccine was the risk of reversion. And this new vaccine, OPV2, is not totally free of reversion risks. And there are many studies underway with different regimens using IPV and OPV.
Nessa lâmina, eu cito alguns dos estudos mais recentes sobre
I mentioned here some of the recent studies about this topic. There are some phase 2 and some phase 3 trials. We have some publications. There are some studies underway to show non-inferiority of IPV using the Sabin strain when compared to the current SOC IPV, because it is expected that there will be a step up in demand after eradication. Studies use different IPV strains, such as Sabin IPV and SOC IPV, in different calendars, different ages, and different doses.
Organização Mundial da Saúde, pode entrar com o próximo, por favor. A Organização Mundial da Saúde,
the OMS recommends that for the protection of against the emergence of any poliovirus, the attenuated oral vaccine should be discontinued and the inactivated vaccine should be the only one to be used. This is according to the OMS strategic plan for 2019-2023. This is the vaccine calendar in Europe. In Europe, they no longer use the oral vaccine. They stopped many years ago. Today, they only use the IPV vaccine. In Latin America, Canada and United States have been used the combined IPV vaccine for many years. In Latin America, Mexico uses 4 doses of IPV vaccine since 2019. Also, Costa Rica, 4 doses of the combined IPV vaccine. So these countries no longer use the oral vaccine. Chile is 4 doses of IPV combined form since they no longer use the oral vaccine. Argentina, since 2012, 4 doses of IPV, the standalone monocomponent. Argentina introduced 4 doses of IPV in 2020, the standalone form. These countries no longer use oral vaccination. Colombia still uses the oral vaccine in some campaigns because it introduced 3 doses of IPV vaccine last year. And Brazil, 3 doses of IPV starting in 2016. But the oral vaccine is still used in campaigns. I'd like to remind you that the other countries in Latin America use 1 or 2 doses of IPV vaccine complemented by the oral bivalent vaccine, and the technical group of the WHO has recommended IPV should be given. Next, the Latin American Society of Pediatric Infectious Diseases recommends 4 doses of IPV vaccine, 3 doses in the primes and a boost, both combined IPV combined with other vaccines, and also the monocomponent vaccine. An additional recommendation here is that an IPV dose, be it the 4th or the 5th, should be administered at 5 or 6 years of age because it extends immunity for longer.
Recentemente, nós encaminhamos,
Recently, we submitted or we published. Recently, we submitted a publication to the Ministry of Health, a large document showing the reasons for this document signed by some of the experts of pediatrics infectology. This document also received the support of many Brazilian societies and organizations, basically stating that considering the existence of a susceptible population due to the drop on vaccine coverage and with the risk of circulation of strains associated or derived from polio's oral vaccine and the inadequate quality of epidemiologic surveillance in Brazil, there is a need for discussing many aspects to maintain polio elimination in our country. And in conclusion, and to that end, the document recommends that in order to reach the objectives of the strategic plan for the global eradication of polio launched by the WHS, as I showed you, we suggest that the PNI begins the plan or the rollout of removing or withdrawing the oral polio vaccine, in addition to including a 4th dose of the inactivated vaccine. So removing the oral vaccine and including a 4th dose. I would like to conclude by saying that we all remain at risk for as long as there is a wild-type polio virus or a virus derived from the attenuated oral vaccine in the environment, the virus will continue circulating. We don't know for how long and can cause the disease in the susceptible population. And to highlight and stress to you that the risk of polio by CVDPV is much greater if we continue to use the attenuated oral polio vaccine, if there is low vaccine coverage, if the epidemiological surveillance continues to be ineffective, if there's no quality environmental surveillance, and if we do not have proper contention of poliovirus. I hope that images such as this become just archive images at a very short time, or in the very short term. Because it's unacceptable that we allow our children to remain susceptible to conditions that are horrible, such as this, paralyzing, limiting a very healthy life a child should have. So I thank you all very much for your attention and for this opportunity.